Yeah, so I'm Roger. I've been just going after No Place Left in Houston for 3.5 years. I was doing stuff in Raleigh, North Carolina before that. It wasn't really called No Place Left, but anyway, since I've been here, I've been just a full-time missionary. But during my free time, I would start to do stuff like I would just start thinking like, man, we really need to like plot out where we're actually like going and sharing the gospel, or like where we have churches that we started, or even churches we've trained and whatnot. So I just in my free time started recording some of that stuff, and our team here, kind of the network of No Place Left Houston, figured out that just the vision of wanting to have a multiplying church in every zip code. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just start plotting zip codes and see where we are and where we are not. If we want to have a multiplying church in every zip code, we can kind of see, it's helpful to see where the zip codes are and where we have churches. So I think for a long time when I was doing that, I would show people like, hey, look at this cool thing. I figured out where we're at, and everyone would kind of be like, cool. And then not much else. And so I was like, okay, I always just did it in my free time. So, I eventually started keeping up a gym map online when we were using Google Drawings, and the gym map was a lot easier. Just anytime I would kind of hear people say something, because like the way that Houston is like a network of networks, so a network of house church networks. So whenever we would just be hanging out with some of the people from the other networks in the city and just hear what they're doing, I would just sort of sneakily write it down and then go record it on my own. But eventually people started kind of paying attention a little bit more and being like, hey, having this gym map or having some other maps is helpful for us as we start to think through strategically how to plan for the city. As I built relationship, people started giving me some of their data more willingly. And so even like all the networks, we record stuff like baptisms, number of people trained. Even at times we track gospel shares. This past year we didn't really, so I have some numbers on that too. But I think it was last December in Christmas where I got a call from Troy Cooper. So even though I was at my parents' house hanging out, got a call from him, and he was like, dude, we need to talk, because my friend Ray Vaughn, who was my team lead here for a while, he just moved overseas though. He was with Troy and them and was showing some of the stuff that I had been doing, and Troy was basically like, man, we need to have some research and No Place Left to let it inform what we're doing, like inform strategy. And I was sort of, when he told me, I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I think you're just saying that. I don't think it's that important. But just talking with him more and kind of realizing, okay, maybe it is important, and started talking even with some other people about that. And it sounded like they were interested too. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just show what I've been doing. And if it can help serve the body, then great. But there's two big things about doing research and data collection for No Place Left work is for it to inform, for actual facts and research to inform our strategy, looking back on what we have done, just to inform strategy of what we will do, because I think a lot of apostolic workers can kind of base things off of wishful thinking or what they think might work, but not actually basing it off the facts. So that's why it's important. But also having something like the map that I posted on Facebook is helpful for planning ahead, seeing where the gaps are, because if you have a target, whatever it may be, like ours is having a multiplying church in every zip code by 2025. If you have that target, it's helpful to know where you are and where you are not. Maybe you have a different target, like 6 streams of fourth generation church, or 500 church planting teams, like they're doing in Southern California. Just whatever it is, just knowing where you have already been helps you plan for where you need to go, because you can see gaps. So anyways, in regards to that, I figured I'd share one story of how research has helped inform strategy in Houston that might encourage you to kind of hear kind of what we did, and maybe it'd be something that would encourage you guys to want to do that too. And then I'll show the specifics of the maps and data I've collected, how I did that, how it's been helpful, stuff like that. It's not super complicated, all of it. I just basically learned on my own. But anyway, so one story of how research has helped shape strategy is in Houston is back in 2017, the summer. We have been doing a lot of 2x2, like knocking on doors, house of peace search, stuff like that. Like, I arrived in fall of 2015. So by that point in 2017, we had like 15,000 gospel shares probably over that for house of peace, like sharing with strangers. And I was getting really frustrated because I knew that. And I had really been staring at our gym map. It's not just that I compiled the gym map and compile this other geographic map. I like stare at it in my free time. So it's like written on my heart. Like I know what's going on. And so I knew what was going on. And I knew that we hadn't had any churches that had started from going 2x2 House of Peace Church that had lasted. And so I was going out and I was like, man, God, I like this, and if you want us to keep doing it, I'll keep doing it. But it seems to me like this isn't cutting it. If we want to have multiplication, we have to have sustained churches. And I was in Southeast Houston, like at this apartment complex. I remember it really well. It was colorful, like pastel colors. God just kind of gave me this revelation from His Word of a church that was started in Pisidian Antioch was not started with finding a person of peace and gathering their oikos, which was groundbreaking to me because I had always read the scriptures looking for persons of peace and knew that had happened, and that's how gathering started. But just seeing one church where they didn't find a person of peace to start a church was really awesome to me. So I went home that day and I pulled out the gym map, which we had about 20 churches. And I was like, I know there's some churches on here that have lasted for a while, like more than 6 months, even over a year. And there's a lot of them that I know haven't lasted. So I went through every single church and I asked the question, how did they start? Or just what is the difference between the ones that have lasted and the ones that haven't lasted? And without fail, to a T, the ones that had lasted were started in some way that was not sharing with strangers, but to someone opening up their home and personally sharing their oikos and gathering them. And all the ones that had fallen away were from people start sharing with strangers and going 2x2 and whatnot. So this is incredible to me. So I started just going through the scriptures, like every single gathering I could think of, like which ones were started by going 2x2, which ones were started by finding a person of peace, and which ones weren't. And I realized about half the gatherings I can think of in the Bible were not started by finding a person of peace, and half were. And so I thought this was great. So I went back to my team. And I was like, I could barely contain myself of wanting to share this with them at like our prayer meeting that was like the next day. And so when I was so excited though, I didn't maybe bring it up in the most appropriate way. I just sort of like did this minute spiel, like blah, 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 just said everything that was on my mind. And they sort of like were staring at me dumbfounded after I said it, like, what did you say, Roger? Like, of course we're gonna, like, you're saying we shouldn't do House of Peace churches. What is going on? I'm a pretty like forward and frank and blunt person. So I think like they kind of gave me pushback and I immediately like went back at them really hard. But I, and they immediately were like, we don't want to stop doing House of Peace churches. So that's what I was saying. I was like, man, it's just not creating churches. Like we need to switch them. We need to switch to primarily focusing on oikos. And they were sort of resistant. And I just resolved in my heart, like, I know this is right. So I just kept on hitting it really hard just every chance we can get. Like, guys, we need to stop doing House of Peace church. We need to do oikos, whatever. And eventually it kind of came around after I was just very aggressively sharing for a while that we did change the strategy based on that. It took about 6 or 9 months for the team to start doing that. And pretty much immediately when we made that change, we started seeing a lot more sustainable discipleship and sustainable churches. And, the team had to pull me aside at one point and just be like, Roger, even when you're like right about this stuff, like you need to work on the way that you say it, because I was not communicating in a very loving way. I was like way too blunt. It was basically like I was verbally punching them in the face for 6 months until they got the picture. But yeah, so don't do that. But anyway, so after that was really the turning point where we started being like, okay, well maybe we can use our data to affect the way that we make disciples. And maybe even to illustrate kind of some data that we gathered to kind of show the difference between pushing oikos versus as a primary strategy versus House of Peace Church. So like I said, we're multiple networks in the city. So the Bay Area network is in Southeast Houston. They're really good at compiling data. I'm not going to say their specific numbers, but I will say in 2015, 2016, half of their, they had a certain amount of green lights, and half of their green lights that they had got baptized. And so that was pretty cool. And in that time, they were really pushing oikos as the primary means of sharing the gospel. But then the next year, they were like, well, we've run out of oikos. We got to go 2x2 a lot more. And even though they had almost 2.5 times the number of green lights and over 3 times the number of gospel shares, they averaged the same amount of baptisms. So basically, they were sharing the gospel like on average like 3 times as much, but only getting the same result. In terms of baptisms, which by the way, Steve Smith, who's a movement practitioner, struggling really poorly with cancer right now, but he said that baptisms are a better indicator of salvations in a movement than professions of faith. So I'm just kind of going off of baptisms in terms of salvation. So basically, it's like we're sharing the gospel 3 times as much, or the Bay Area network is, but they're saying the same number of salvations on average. And then that was 2017 where they saw the drop in baptisms, and then 2018. They shifted back this past year to primarily pushing oikos as a strategy, or their primary strategy for sharing the gospel. And immediately they saw their baptism rate jump up to now, again, it was 58% of green lights got baptized. So again, when they're pushing Oikos early on, 50% of green lights got baptized. When they started going 2 by 2, it dropped to 14.5% got baptized. Then last year when they shifted to emphasizing Oikos again, it jumped up to 58%. And so that's just some data to kind of illustrate like there is more sustainable discipleship. I think the baptisms are also just indicative of sustainable discipleship and just knowing them well. I know that led to more sustainable churches, which I don't have specific numbers on churches now, but I know that it did create sustainability. So that just shows how kind of data and research helped inform strategy, but then even has ongoingly proved that shift in strategy change. And now actually through research, I've been able to notice some people who have gone 2 by 2 and started churches that have lasted, but it was just recognizing that they're moving a bit slower. They're not moving as fast. So that's another, I'm not really trying to emphasize the Oikos versus 2 by 2 thing now. I'm just trying to illustrate a story about how research has informed strategy, if that makes sense to you guys. So it was really kind of analyzing every single church that we had started and recognizing that it was Oikos that we needed to be pushing to create that sustainability. And there's been more stories like that along the way where we've had research inform what we've been doing. But I can kind of show you like some of the pictures I posted of mapping and whatnot. I'm going to share my screen with you guys and show you the mapping I've been doing of Houston. And I can show you a Gym Map as well, but I think that probably most people have seen the Gym Mapper app, but I can just open up our Gym Mapper as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys real quick, so just give me 1 second. So yeah, like I said, we're trying to have a multiplying church in every zip code. So basically what I started to do in Houston was, first thing I started to do is I started just mapping out where we have churches in the city. So you can see here where we have churches in the city. And they're color coordinated based on generations. So red is Gen 1, orange is Gen 2, yellow is Gen 3, and purple is Gen 4. This also includes a few groups. We have a few groups that are not identifying as church that are gathering regularly. That's pretty cool. But it's kind of hard to tell where there's gaps and where there's not gaps. So then I figured I'd start mapping zip codes. So that's where you get this really colorful map here. And I can explain how we got this. Let me take away the churches real quick. And you guys tell me, if we're trying to strategize to reach every zip code in Houston, like where do you see gaps and where we don't have a lot of work going? Which I should say the green means we have a church in that zip code. Purple means someone's owning it, as in they're trying to engage it. And the blue means we have a group. So where do you guys see gaps in terms of where there's no color?
West Central and Northeast.
Yeah, I don't know if somebody who has seen me do this already just said that, but that's exactly right. So this Northeast up here is a pretty big gap, even over East a bit. But yeah, West Central is a very densely populated area that doesn't have a lot. It's also kind of urban wealthy. We don't have a lot of monks. So there's also, you can map things based off of people groups if that's your focus, but it's hard to do that geographically. So yeah, so we even recently, so what we started to do is recognize that zip codes are good and we want to own that, but we said that zip codes are a little bit too small. It's good to break down the whole Houston metro area into smaller chunks that we can think about, but zip codes are a little bit too small. So we said, how can we break it down into maybe larger geographic areas? So we actually found the University of Texas Health. They mapped out the city based on socioeconomic and geographic areas. So I was like, oh, that's really convenient. I mean, socioeconomic and geographic groupings are probably going to go together. So we started saying, how can we have a network of house churches in every single one of these areas, these 30 areas, and how can we have people owning these areas and even communicating that and vision casting towards that? So the orange means there's at least 2 generations of churches in that area, and abundant gospel sowing, which is not as clearly defined. And then the red is work has begun. So again, you can see that Northeast big gap, and the West Central has a big gap too. So anyways, so recently my friend Philip, who's in the Bay Area, who's a faithful laborer, if any of you guys know Philip and Lacey Lynch, it's them, and he was just had on his heart from God, just where are gaps. And so we started talking about like people group gaps, even socioeconomic gaps. So I could easily pull up this map and we just started talking it through, and he was just asking me what's going on in this West Central area, who are these peoples, why are we not here? We could start talking through the gaps, and so he could record that, start praying towards that, and maybe even vision casting towards that. So that's a way that the sort of mapping or the sort of research informs strategy going forward. So kind of the baptism story shows how we can compile data of what God has already done, and it can inform strategy, and this kind of shows us where we are going. Does that make sense? Yes? Good? Okay. I'm just going to keep on going. Hold any questions till the end, and I can go back to any of this, by the way. So one thing I found helpful, though, if you're thinking through research, is that people do not like giving data. They just do not like to tell people what they're doing. And so I found that the best thing to do is whatever your target area is, first off, actually doing research, that's a thing to do. You know, we're all going after no place left, but no place left division, just saying that is kind of vague. And so if you have a more clear target, like we want to get to no place left by having a multiplying church in every zip code, or we want to get to no place left by having 1,000 baptisms, or whatever it is, that kind of guides what research you should compile. So for me, it's important to compile zip codes. It's important to compile baptisms, because that shows salvations. We compile data on training too, but really doesn't go beyond that. I basically keep the geographic map up, and I keep the gen map up, and that's about it. And then also we keep track of baptisms and training numbers, and that's it. Because beyond that, I would love to know, you know, gospel sharing, number of gospel shares, but it's really hard to get that data. I would love to know, you know, how everyone's doing, mauling the whole process, but it's really hard to get all those numbers. So I really just had to say, okay, what's the most basic numbers that we need, and let's go with that. I think anyone as a researcher should be able to do that. And also important thing for either you being a researcher or finding a researcher for your city or your area or whatever you're doing is to be a practitioner, you know, because my primary thing is not this. This is a free time thing. What I do in my free time, you know, my primary thing is share the gospel, disciple folks, start churches, and pour into leaders. And through that, also it helps. And I mean, that means that as I look at this stuff, like I said, I stare at it sometimes. It makes it a lot easier for me to put my mind around and know where we need to go. Let's see what else. So yeah, shoot for the minimal amount of data that you need. And basically also doing research is helpful that whoever is the researcher needs to have relationships with everyone they're trying to get data from. Because like I said at the beginning of doing this, I kind of just had to like overhear something in conversation, then kind of sneakily write it down and then go put it on my computer in the gym map. But now I can pretty much call up people in the city. Like even tomorrow, I'm going to call up someone to get some information. I can pretty much call up any of the leaders and just be like, hey, can you let me know what's going on in your church? Like where it's at, like, have you started anything new? They'll pretty much send me the data as quickly as they can. So that's really helpful. So anytime, which I don't update stuff that frequently, like, you know, maybe before an IOI or a mid-level or at the end of the year, I write like an annual case study for every year. And so I'll usually compile information. It's just helpful to know annual growth or decline, things like that. So the last thing that I particularly was going to show you guys. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen the gym mapper here, let me see. I assume everyone's seen it, but you know what happens when we assume. So this is like a super helpful way to track generations of churches. So here's the Houston gym map. It looks so big because prison ministry goes back, half the stuff on this map in prison, half isn't. But it's helpful just to see like patterns and trends and generations. So if you don't have an up-to-date gym map for your city, maybe you don't need one because you're just starting. But I would encourage you to get that rolling early. It's the kind of thing that if you wait until you have like 20 churches to start it, it's really hard. It takes a long time to compile all that data. But if you start it early when you have like 5 churches and then grow it over time, it's easier. But if you want to know how I did this fancy pants stuff, like with the mapping of areas and zip codes, because when I showed this last time at E3 Partners kind of retreat, people were like, how'd you do that? And I was like, I didn't do hardly anything. Like it really just does it all for you. Basically, my friend Chris Lynch, he knows how to do this stuff better than me. He just doesn't want to do it. So he taught me something called a KML file, and which I don't know what KML file means, honestly, but all I know is that when I upload it, it makes these lines and whatnot, which I can demonstrate how easy it is. Like if you okay, let me do this one. So if you open up a Google My Map and you basically type in your city and say GIS data. GIS stands for like geographic information something. I don't know. do, you know, well, I did Houston Metro GIS data. So this is the Houston Metro GIS data portal, which basically they compile, like the city compiles data on tons of stuff like roads, water stuff, census tracts, even where crime happens. So if I open the one that says boundaries right here, it has all this, here, let me figure out how to open it. It has all these like Lambert tiles, whatever else, city, county, districts. But if you just click on it, like if I click on the zip codes one, here's all the boundaries of the zip codes, and it has a file down here, down here somewhere. I don't see it at the moment, but basically, oh yeah, where it says download, and I can hit KML file, download it. Then when I download it to my computer, if I go to Google My Maps and hit add layer over here in the left-hand column, and by the way, I'm only doing this because some people ask me to, and I hit import, and I go to my files, and my computer loads. And let's say I do super neighborhoods of Houston, and I open that file, that KML file of the super neighborhoods, which is something I had downloaded before. Look, there's nothing there, right? Just give it a second, and then it'll be like magic almost. There you go. Minimal to no effort, and now mapped out where every single neighborhood in Houston is. So I did none of that drawing it. All I did was find the KML file online, and then I uploaded it. So that was pretty cool, right? I thought it was cool the first time I learned that. I was like, this is mind blowing. And so yeah, it can just be helpful if you want to have some of that data for your area. And then also on Google My Maps, you can kind of, if you see over in the left-hand column, it says style by name. That means anytime I rename one of these areas, like for example, this one, it says owned at the top right here. If I change that name, which it's not letting me do it, so I'll just do this one. So you said it's not titled right here, so it's empty. But if I change this box right here, something like church, it'll automatically change to green to show that. So if you style by name and make your naming system consistent, you can do that. Yeah, and again, it's whatever your vision is in terms of what you want to plot on a map like this, or maybe you don't need a geographic map, you need other data or whatnot. But that is pretty much everything that I've done for Houston and how it's helped. And I'm still learning how to communicate this stuff and help people out and reproduce it. So let me know if anything was unclear. So yeah, for the rest of the time, if anyone has any questions, I'll totally love to take those, and I'll stop sharing my screen with you guys. Go back to kind of normal there. Yeah, anybody have any questions of any of that? I saw Ed posted one in the comments. He said, Roger, did you say that from the biblical examples, about 50% were cost and 30% were going 2 by 2? Yes. You see. Yeah, I did say that. That was my own personal study. And actually, I should say that in our mid-level last year in May, Steve Smith was there, and he did a study called the Oikos Hammer, which is really helpful to show that the primary way that God has reached people all along was through Oikos. And so that really sealed the deal for me, because in the end, research can be helpful for strategy, but we need to be guided by the Spirit and prayer and Bible first and foremost. So if you are interested in the Oikos thing, I can send you the Oikos Hammer. It's really an awesome study. By the way, almost every single time I've done research of this stuff, I've gone back and looked at the scripture, and I was like, I realize this is like working like in our city, but is it in the Bible? And almost every time I've been able to see like, oh, they were doing this in the Bible. I just never saw it before. And so it's been cool, like doing research has helped me get a better understanding on the movement that they're doing in the Bible. So.
I got a question for you, Roger. This is Ben. When you said you guys switched kind of your primary emphasis to pushing Oikos, like what does that look like? What do you mean by that? And how does that like practically play out?
Yeah, I think, honestly, like what we found is that we were training people on like Oikos maps or relationship maps. Like we would train it in an event training, or maybe like when we would do our 4-on-1, we'd train people, but then we would never bring it up again. And so really we didn't have to do a lot of difference in training. We just started talking about Oikos all the time. Like in our church gatherings during the 3/3 during vision casting time, we just started pulling out our Oikos map and saying, hey, everybody, we want to make disciples. This is our primary focus. Add 1 or 2 people to your Oikos map this week, or to right now, like during our church time, and pray over it for a few minutes. It'll just take like 2 minutes. But that just shifted focus. You can really see people thinking like, oh, there are some people at my work who I haven't shared with, or in my neighborhood. And then even at trainings, when we would do an event training, we would still go out 2 by 2, but we just started communicating a lot more like, the primary, even though 2x2 is great, like the primary thing we want to focus on is the people who are already in our lives and just really pushing that. And I think just pushing people to that. One thing that happened immediately, it felt like everything slowed down so much and it felt like gospel shares dropped so much. But in reality, it just got more sustainable because people share the gospel maybe less every week, but every gospel share is a lot more potent. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. We just started talking about it a lot more. Like I don't coach anyone to go 2x2 anymore. I just really push them on how to share with their oikos and invite them back to their home church they're a part of, their house church, the multiplying church that they're a part of. And if somebody wants to go 2x2, I think it's fine. We still have people doing that. I just try to encourage them to kind of build relationships in that and go back repeatedly and go slower. So it's kind of like building oikos, and we're seeing some fruit from that now, which I think has been exciting to see. So yeah, that's hope that answers your question, Tim.
Yeah, that's helpful. So at the very end, you said you kind of push on like maybe on the slowing down, building relationships, and like building oikos. Is it? So just a question for folks that kind of just drop in to a place and they don't know anybody. What do y'all typically do for those people? And just really highly encourage building oikos somehow, or?
Yeah. Like I said, I realized actually being in India and seeing how outsiders acted there, I realized me as an outsider in Houston where I don't have a lot of oikos, the biggest thing is finding people who are locals who are willing to share with people in their lives and gather them. And they're way more fruitful than me. So I would say if you really are an outsider, I'm trying to find some people who are insiders and train them up, maybe first and foremost. So yeah, then building oikos, because I realized even though I'm an outsider, like I like to run, so I joined a running club and trying to share the gospel through there. And like I said, we started recognizing that, people, when they moved into a new area, we got some people who do that very intentionally to share the gospel. So they don't know anyone. They just, they'll be intentional to share the gospel. Maybe it's not the first time they meet someone. Maybe it's like the third, which when I first got to Houston, that was like blasphemy. We would just be going really hard. But yeah, just seeing them bear a lot more fruit, long-term discipleship, and even seeing that amongst some internationals, some immigrants in the city, which has been encouraging. Even some people doing some Loving Loud stuff, like there's people in the city that use weekly hip hop events, share with Urban Poor, kind of contextualized in that way, and meet people over time, build that oikos. And I've started a number of churches that way. And talking with the guy in Dallas who they said that they've been going 2x2 really hard a lot, but then they said, hey, let's just do a cookout once a month in these places just to meet people. So I'm not really good at events. When I came to Christ, I was always taught to go 2x2 really fast. So I'm still learning how to do that, building oikos better, but that's just some stuff I've seen. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah, that answers your question. So I'll say first, if someone's moving into a new area, the first thing I've noticed is most helpful is finding locals that you can train up who are believers, who are willing to share with people around them and gather them. And then two, just move slower, maybe even doing some Loving Loud stuff if you can, and just build that oikos and be intentional to share the gospel. It just might take a little bit longer. It's kind of like focus on an area for 6 months rather than 6 weeks. So, yeah. Any other questions about the oikos thing or just research in general?
Is there any other data that you, in hindsight, would look back and wish that you would have kept outside of the stuff that you have right now?
Well, I will say in the beginning, one thing I didn't share with you guys was our form that we use to, our specific team to compile the data. I would say at the beginning, we were tracking a lot of stuff. We were tracking number of churches contacted, number of baptisms, name of persons baptized. Well, we still track that stuff. We just track number of coaching meetings, number of network touches and stuff, and it was just a lot. And so I really actually would say in the beginning we tracked too much. So paring it down to just saying baptisms, trained, churches, and the generations of the churches has been really good. And that's probably what I would have pushed from the beginning. In the beginning, we also did better at tracking gospel shares, which has been more difficult now. So I would still love to have gospel share information to know how many times it's shared every month, but it's just really hard to get that down as the generations go. So I would just really emphasize the data that you track should be based on your target vision. And so that changes depending on your target. So I personally wouldn't change how we're doing data compilation right now. it'd always be good to have more, but I don't think it's necessary. So that's just the quantitative stuff too, by the way. I mean, the qualitative stuff is really excellent. Like I told you, I have a case study written every year, like annually. And so now I just, that's just something I noticed the No Place Left Army Network did a few times. And I was like, it's a good idea just to kind of record our progression over the years. So I have a 2016, 17, and 18 one. And it was just good at the end of the year to call up all the leaders to just kind of get the qualitative stuff like, hey, what were some big barriers you hit this year? How do you overcome them? What barriers do you still have? What are you planning to do? Type of stuff. That was just super helpful, I think. So not just quantitative data, but qualitative is really helpful. Just to kind of keep track of. I don't know. Hope that answers your question, Tony.
Yeah, it does. I think we've in Austin have had an issue with like maintaining data in certain areas, and once the data just gets overwhelming, it's kind of hard to change things. So we're getting ready to start from the ground up and just kind of trying to think about what data would be valuable to keep track of, and not overdo it, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like even from the beginning, we were using Google Forms to track like every single gospel share that we did, like where it's at, which is cool to look at, and I still have a lot of those maps. It's so hard to keep up with that. It gets overwhelming. Like you're going out 2 by 2 and you're having to enter in the address every single time you knock on a door. It's hard. Even though it's helpful, it's hard.
I just have a quick question. We have, I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We have about 150 groups going right now. And just as we're starting to kind of get back in and do all of this, I'm just wondering like what strategy, if anyone could suggest of how we can start, dividing out and plotting and making sure that that we're getting data as best as we can. We actually work with a lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers. So
Cool.
that's kind of, if there are any suggestions that way of how you're effectively getting data kind of pumped back to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to talk about how I've done it, and maybe it'll be helpful for you. First off, 150 groups is awesome.
Yeah, praise God.
Yeah, it's great, and even hitting up middle schoolers and high schoolers, so the next generation might not be lost. But anyways, yeah, like I said earlier, it's really hard to backtrack and fill a lot of that data because once you get to 150 and go from nothing to that, it's a lot. But one thing I will say that was helpful when I had to do the initial compiling of data, and I would call up the leader for like an hour, like the network leader, like the guy who knows the most in the network. I'll call him up for like an hour and literally go every single church, like, okay, where are you meeting? Like, give me the address, like what number of people there, what are you guys doing, when did it start? Like, I just had to go like circle by circle. If you know the Gin Mapper, like every single circle I had to do it. But what was helpful, instead of calling up 100 people to compile that data, just finding that network leader, the guy who has a lot of generations under them or who would know the most, and kind of boil it down to like, what are the 3 or 4 people who would know the most of this, and get as much data as I can from them. And that first time doing it, it's going to take forever, but just do it. And then after that, you can kind of tweak and maybe talk to people more downstream. Because like I said, probably right now, every network in the city, or at least of the 6 house church networks that we have in the city, probably 3 or 4 of them, I know exactly who I would call to get or all of them I know who I would call, but I think 3 of them have like a dedicated, like, I know they're the data guy. So every single time I need some information from them, I'll just hit up that one person. So instead of in the network that has 5 churches, instead of going to talk to 5 leaders, I just talk to the one guy who knows it all. So yeah, but that takes a lot of relationship as well. Like I know all those people and love them a lot, and they love me and know me. No, I'm not trying to just get numbers from them. So it's really based off relationship. I don't know if that's helpful for you, Liz.
Yeah, that's good.
Liza, sorry. Oh, by the way, one thing I think, if you're doing schools, I think that GIS data will have, like, you can download a map file that will plot every single school. Like in your
That's what I learned. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to dig into that. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think I've seen stuff like that. So if you're doing a lot in schools, it'll,
yeah,
not 100%, but I think I've seen stuff like that. I mean, it's like random stuff. Like they'll plot out like where crimes happen, where there's like waterways, Like, yeah, just go through a lot of that stuff. I mean, I don't have any use for, but they've just got a lot there. So
How can we get a hold of that Oikos hammer?
I'll tell you what, I have it in the file in my Google Drive, which I'm not sure if I can post right here right now. Yeah,
I think
I'll tell you
Troy just posted one this last week, I think.
He did. Somebody asked for it. If you go to the No Place Left Facebook page and scroll down a bit, somebody asked for it, and I think they posted the paper like copy that you can go through yourself. But also, Steve Smith walked us through it. Like, he didn't actually make us do it as Discovery. He was kind of half going back and forth conversational with it. But I thought it was really good at our mid-level last year. So if you go to the No Place Left Houston YouTube channel and look for Steve Smith Oikos Hammer, the long version, he'll walk you through that as well. But if you can't, I think it was posted in the Facebook group as well. So if you can't find it there, just let me know. I just posted my email for anyone who wants to email me about information later or about that if you can't find it. I just put it in the chat. So
I guess just throughout this conversation, you kind of just noticed that a lot of the, I guess, things that you're tracking are like due to like live churches. Do you think it's also useful to track something like, such as like dead churches, for example, like so you can kind of figure out, which, not to say which places to avoid, but kind of see trends on where these places are and just, know and expect that, we might not have any grounding in this sort of place. I don't know, it's just, I guess as a researcher, I kind of think of like, oh, it's kind of like negative data, which can also be useful. But what do you think on that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I would say any data that you find helpful, go for it. I know actually the Bay Area Network in Houston, they do have a gym map where they keep on all their dead churches. And so they can kind of look at those and kind of notice. First off, they noticed that they were at least starting more churches every year, so there were more dead churches every year. But yeah, for that specific reason, to really ask, what is happening to cause these to evaporate, or maybe God's not working in a certain area. So I would say go for that. That might be actually, Tony, if maybe he asked earlier what's some data that I would have wanted to track from the beginning. That might have been a good thing to keep up with, actually. Which I do have a gym map from every single year, at the end of every year. So I was able to do that more recently, like look at the churches that died and kind of notice that. But yeah, that's a good thing to keep track of. What's your name again?
Allison.
Allison. That's awesome. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
Allison does research at UTL Science Center, so she's got the research brain for this.
Yeah. You're going to basically take everything that I said, because I really have no idea what I'm doing.
I'm trying to work on it, so I'm trying to figure it out here at least. So